3 days, 3 failed hunts, 3 nights of empty stomachs. The African sun had already disappeared beyond the horizon. One by one, the hunters returned to their camp. No celebration, no laughter, no meat, only silence. A small child looked toward the hunters with hope, then slowly lowered his head. He already knew the answer. Tonight, they would sleep hungry. For most predators, a failed hunt meant another chase tomorrow. But for early Hum, the next morning, the family didn't follow fresh hoof prints. They didn't search for another antelope. Instead, they searched for something far easier to miss. The mother slowly walked across the dry grassland, her eyes fixed on the ground. She wasn't looking for animals. She was looking for signs. A patch of disturbed soil, a familiar plant, a place she had seen before. Then she stopped. Without saying a word, she knelt and began digging with a simple wooden stick. The ground was hard, dry, unforgiving. The children watched silently. For a moment, it looked like there was nothing there. Then, a thick underground tuber emerged from the soil. Not meat, not exciting, but enough to keep a family alive. For early humans, food wasn't always running across the savanna. Sometimes, it was hiding beneath their feet. Researchers believe underground storage organs, such as tubers, bulbs, and edible roots, were dependable food sources in many African environments, especially when larger prey was difficult to find. Unlike fruit, they didn't disappear overnight. Unlike animals, they couldn't run away. Nature had quietly stored them underground, waiting for anyone patient enough to search. But the family search wasn't over. A young boy wandered toward a fallen tree. He stopped. Something had caught his attention. The old log was crumbling. Carefully, he pulled away a piece of rotten wood. Inside, hundreds of pale beetle larvae twisted through the damp timber. Most of us would immediately pull our hand away. Our ancestors did the opposite. To them, these tiny creatures were concentrated nutrition, rich in protein, rich in fat, easy to gather. And unlike large animals, they never needed a dangerous chase. Not far away, another discovery waited. A towering termite mound stood beneath the blazing African sun. The father struck it with a stone. Within seconds, thousands of termites poured from tiny openings. The family quickly began collecting them before the insects disappeared back inside. It may seem surprising today, but edible insects remain part of the traditional diet in many regions of Africa. Modern nutritional research shows that many species provide valuable protein, healthy fats, iron, and essential minerals. Tiny creatures with extraordinary value. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the youngest child looked upward, high above the ground. Wild bees disappeared into the hollow of an ancient tree. The adults exchanged a glance. Finding honey was never easy. Bees defended it fiercely, but hidden inside that tree was one of nature's richest rewards. Sweet, energy-dense, ready to eat. Long before sugar existed, there was honey. Some researchers suggest it may have been one of the most prized foods available to early humans, providing concentrated energy that was difficult to find anywhere else in nature. By sunset, the family still hadn't caught a single animal, yet they were no longer hungry. They hadn't survived because they hunted better. They survived because they had learned to see food where every other predator saw nothing. But even after finding roots, insects, and honey, one incredible source of nutrition still remained. Ironically, it was often left behind by the deadliest hunters on Earth. The family had eaten, but not enough. The roots filled their stomachs. The insects provided valuable protein. The honey delivered precious energy. Yet something was still missing. Fat, the most energy-rich nutrient available in the prehistoric world. Finding it was never easy. As the afternoon faded, the father suddenly froze. Fresh tracks, not antelope, not zebra, lions very fresh. He raised his hand. Everyone stopped. Silence returned. No one moved. For several long moments, they simply listened. The distant cries of scavenging birds drifted across the savanna. Then, nothing. Slowly, carefully. The family followed, not because they wanted to challenge a lion, but because they hoped the danger had already passed. Ahead, they found the remains of a carcass. Most of the meat was gone. Powerful jaws had stripped away nearly everything. To another predator, there was nothing left. But early humans saw something different: possibility. The father picked up a heavy stone. He placed a long leg bone against another rock. Then, with all his strength, he struck. Nothing. He struck again. A sharp crack echoed across the quiet plain. The bone split open. Inside was something no claw could easily reach. Bone marrow, soft, rich, packed with fat. For hungry families, it was one of the most valuable foods nature could offer. Modern archaeological sites preserve thousands of broken animal bones, many showing impact marks consistent with deliberate marrow extraction using stone tools. These discoveries suggest that early humans weren't interested only in meat. They understood that the greatest reward could be hidden inside the bone itself. Unlike muscle, marrow remained protected long after predators had finished feeding. Sometimes, the real meal began after the hunt was already over. The children watched as pieces of marrow were carefully shared among the family. No one spoke. Nothing was wasted. Every calorie mattered. Every discovery increased their chances of surviving another day. And slowly, a remarkable pattern was emerging. Whenever nature closed one door, humans searched for another. They gathered roots from beneath the earth. They collected insects hidden inside fallen trees. They climbed for honey high above the ground. They cracked open bones that every other predator ignored. One by one, these discoveries revealed a truth that would shape the future of our entire species. Humanity's greatest advantage was never strength. It was something far more powerful. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the family gathered around a small fire. There was no enormous feast, no giant animal stretched across the camp, only a handful of roots, a little honey, a few insects, some precious marrow. By modern standards, it seemed like almost nothing. Yet this simple meal carried an extraordinary lesson. Every other predator on the African savanna depended on a narrow strategy. Lions relied on strength. Cheetahs relied on speed. Hyenas relied on powerful jaws. Vultures waited for death. If that strategy failed, they had few alternatives. But humans were different. When the hunt failed, they dug beneath the earth. When fruit disappeared, they searched inside fallen trees. When predators finished feeding, they looked inside the bones. When honey was hidden high above the ground, they found a way to reach it. They didn't master one food. They learned to master change itself. That flexibility became one of humanity's greatest survival advantages. It allowed small groups to endure droughts, survive failed hunts, and move into landscapes that challenged almost every other animal. Researchers believe this remarkable dietary flexibility helped early humans occupy an increasingly wide range of environments over hundreds of thousands of years. No single meal transformed our species. No single discovery changed everything overnight. Instead, countless small discoveries accumulated across generations. A child learned which roots were safe to eat. A mother remembered where honey could be found after the rainy season. A hunter discovered that broken bones still held valuable fat inside. These lessons were shared, repeated, improved, then passed to the next generation. Slowly, knowledge became as important as food itself. The family sitting beside this fire had no idea they were shaping the future. They weren't trying to change human evolution. They were simply trying to survive until tomorrow. Yet every successful adaptation, every new food source, every lesson remembered, gave their children a slightly better chance of living long enough to have children of their own. Across thousands of generations, those small advantages accumulated, not through one dramatic moment, but through millions of ordinary decisions. Perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength. Not sharper teeth, not faster legs, not greater muscles, but the ability to learn, to remember, and to adapt whenever the world changed. And that ability would eventually carry humans far beyond the African savanna, into deserts, forests, mountains, frozen tundra, and much later to every continent on Earth. But even the most adaptable family still faced one relentless challenge. Food could sometimes be found, one way or another. Water was far less forgiving. Where did early humans drink when there were no rivers nearby, no wells, and no villages? That question would shape the next chapter of humanity's journey. Night settled quietly across the African savanna. The fire burned low. The day's search was finally over. There was no giant feast, no legendary hunt, no dramatic victory, only a small collection of ordinary foods shared among an ordinary family. A few roots, a handful of insects, a little honey, pieces of rich marrow. It didn't look like the kind of meal that changes history. But history is rarely changed by a single meal. It is changed by the families who survive long enough to see another sunrise. The children slept peacefully beside the fire. For the first time in days, their stomachs were full, not because their parents had become stronger, not because they had become faster, but because they had learned a lesson that nature had been quietly teaching all along. Never depend on just one path to survival. When one source of food disappeared, they searched for another. When the seasons changed, they changed with them. When the world became unpredictable, they adapted. Generation after generation, these small decisions accumulated. A mother remembered where edible roots grew after the rains. A father taught his son which insects were safe to gather. A child learned to recognize the sound of wild bees hidden inside an ancient tree. Knowledge became memory. Memory became tradition. And tradition became survival. Long before humans built cities, wrote books, or crossed oceans, they first learned something much simpler. The world was full of opportunities if they were willing to look beyond the obvious. Perhaps that is why our ancestors endured while so many others disappeared, not because they always found food, but because they refused to stop searching. Every root they uncovered, every termite mound they opened, every drop of honey they risked collecting, every bone they cracked, was another small step in a journey that would last hundreds of thousands of years. The greatest human superpower was never perfect hunting. It was the courage and the curiosity to adapt. And in the end, that quiet ability to change proved stronger than claws, faster than speed, and more enduring than brute strength. The family beside this fire would never know it, but their determination, their patience, and their willingness to learn helped shape the future of our species, not through one extraordinary moment, but through thousands of ordinary ones. The next morning, before the family searched for food, they faced another challenge, one far more urgent. They could survive days without eating, but only a short time without water. There were no wells, no rivers nearby, no maps, no villages, only an endless African landscape, hiding one of nature's most precious resources. So how did early humans find water when there was none in sight?